Title of that always gets me. All right. So the topic for today is, does your life point to God? And so what I want us to think about is on our daily in our daily life and the choices that we have to make. Do we regard God when it comes to our daily choices? Can others really tell that we're Christian? And if they can, how so? And we're going to focus on David and Solomon. So while we are speaking about these two guys, I want us to pay attention to some of the life lessons that we can learn from them, because I think it's important that when we read the Bible, we get the application part. Like, how can I apply the Bible to my life? Because the people in the Bible are real people. So we have to be able to learn from them. All right, so we're going to start off with David. I think, I'm not sure if you guys got to read the scriptures that we sent out earlier today, but we're probably all very familiar with King David. He's the one that is considered to be, God's favorite. He was after God's heart. We learn about how, as a young man, he defeated a giant, right? And then God, blessed him, honored him, and made him the king over Israel. So we're going to pick up David's story from 2 Samuel chapter 11. I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to summarize for you guys. And then hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, you can go back later and refresh your minds. So picture this, right? King David. He sent his men off to war because he's King David. God has blessed him. He can do whatever he wants to do. So he just hanging out in his house. It says that he got up from bed and he was just walking around, and then he just happens to see a woman outside bathing. And naturally, he was interested, right? So he then calls for this woman, and he's the king, right? So she's brought to him, and he does whatever he wants to do, and then sends her away. But before that, he does know that she's a married woman, right? She's actually married to one of the soldiers that he just happened to send away to war. And so this woman then gets pregnant, right? And he comes back. She finds a way to let the king know, like, hey, I'm pregnant. What are you going to do? So David, in his trying to fix everything, comes up with a great manipulative story, right? He went and gets the Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, from the wall. And he's like, hey, come home, be at home, like, come and be with your wife. But this guy is an upstanding citizen. He's like, why would I do such thing when my brothers are at war? So he refuses. So he doesn't take the bait. He just stays away from his wife. And eventually David realizes that his story is not going to work. So then he sends the guy back to war, and then plans for him to be put in the front line so he can be killed. So fast forward, the guy is killed. Now David gets to marry the woman. And so he marries the woman, and he's, everything looks fine. But it says in 2 Samuel chapter 12 that God was not happy with David, right? Because that's not the king that he was honoring and favoring. So God sends prophet Nathan to David and basically, gives him a story and says, well, this man did this. What do you think should happen? So David, of course, being righteous and whatnot, he's like, well, this is what should happen to this man. And so Nathan then says, well, you're the man. So you did this. And the part that I want to read out loud is David's response to what was said. So, Sister J, if you have your Bible.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to start off
13.
Yes. She's so good. She always have it ready. All right, so go ahead.
And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, the Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because this deed thou hast given great occasion to enemy, because of this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. The child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. Therefore David besought God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the 7th day that the child died, and the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake to him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, is the child dead? And they said, he is dead. Then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Then said his servants unto him, what thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, thou did rise and eat bread. And he said, while the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went unto her and lay with her, and she bare a son, and he called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jedediah, because of the Lord. And Joab fought against.
Oh, we're gonna stop right there.
Okay.
Thank you. So with this story of David, I want us to have a little bit discussion as to one, what are your thoughts on it, and what lessons can we learn from David up to this point?
It's almost hard to relate to David because he's a king and he can do what he wants. So I could say, well, if I was a king, I wouldn't do that. But I'm not a king. You know what I mean? I don't know if I've seen some easy on the eyes man, and I'm the queen. Lord. So it's a little hard to relate.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just to this in particular.
Okay. All right. So how about on a different level, any life lessons or anything that you can pick from what we saw happen and how David behaved and how God behaved with him? Any?
Well, you can do what you want, but if you know better, you know the Lord's going to respond. Basically.
Well, I think there was like two extremes. First, he wanted to reconcile Bathsheba with Uriah. Come and lay with your wife. Comfort her, giving him a break, a vacation, so to speak. And then, when that didn't work, I'm just going to get rid of him. It's like night and day. I mean, shouldn't there have been some kind of middle ground he could have found, short of causing the death of Uriah, one of his own men, who was a faithful man, according to scripture. Hey, that's my take. It just happened. It just one of those things that happened in life. He was the king at that time, and I'm sure that a lot of this similar things may be happening even today, with the wealth that some folk have. It will turn heads. But it's a quite interesting story, and I'm thinking the first thing that I was thinking when I was reading before the study is that at that time, God spoke at them. They didn't have, like we have, the comforter that guide us to help us, So that's a little different.
So I think, was David really trying to give him a vacation, or was he just trying to cover up what he did, right? So we can kind of think about in our own lives when we do something and it may not go the way that we were expected, right? We're expecting it to go, but then we start thinking about other ways of finding a solution or ways to cover it up so the truth doesn't really come out, right? So it's like, well, I have a secret and I don't want it to come out. So what am I going to do to make sure that it doesn't come out? And that's essentially what David was doing. How do I not let this come out that I did this thing?
Yes, he was definitely not giving him a vacation. He was trying to cover his tracks. He wanted Uriah to go in there and be like, oh man, I've been on the road. Baby, I missed you. But that did not happen.
And then he killed him.
Right? Like, I need to get rid of you.
In my mind, right? In my mind, David was a dirty dude.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying, you can take the person out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the person, right? Because David he went from a shepherd boy to a king, is all I know, right? But this dude, dirty, because he saw the lady as like, yo, I'm king, who is that? They told the man, that's Uriah's wife, the Hittite. At the end of the day, he was like, yo, get her over here. That's dirty. And then when she said, hey, king, I'm pregnant, that dude said, okay, let's go get Uriah, and let me just play with him, talk to him face to face and say, hey, go home, eat, do what you do. And Uriah, man, he was an upstanding guy. He just proved to be an upstanding guy, because I believe the scriptures say something like he laid out there with the king's servants, like laid at the door and did not even go home, didn't even look at his wife. What'd you say?
Right.
And then David was like, this man didn't look at his wife, yo. And then he asked Uriah, why you not looking at your wife? He got desperate, like, come on, man, go home. He waited a couple more days. He left Uriah there 2 more days. And Uriah was like, what does it look like? My men out here in battle, and I'm sitting here, trying to eat and drink and be merry. It's not gonna work out like that for me. That's not how it works. David, dirty. He said, yo, put that man in the front line and kill him. Because check it. If she was pregnant, right, which she was, and then Uriah would have slept with her, this baby's still coming out, right? This baby's coming. And then what they was gonna do, try to just cover up who's the daddy for how long? And Bathsheba would have known better too. Like, yo, hey, that's a lot. That's a lot to be trying to keep a secret.
And listen, it's almost like he was cowardly too, because he's the king. Uriah, I slept with your wife, she's pregnant.
Hey.
What do you want to do about that, man? Let's talk about this. I'm the king.
Right, because what was Uriah gonna do?
Yeah.
Right?
He's gonna say king. He's gonna be mad.
So it's like he knew
Right,
Uriah was a good
mad.
dude.
But
But they had statutes, right? They had statutes against that, didn't they?
Who, the king had statutes?
Right.
I'm just saying, like, what? I'm just saying, why did he kill the man? I mean, it's no reason asking why today. I'm just saying, it was rather extreme when he was the king.
I think it's a funny thing what you'll do when you don't want your sins uncovered.
My God.
Right. So it's like almost out of desperation. So
Yeah,
probably not thinking all the way through. It's just whatever comes that sounds good, right? Should be done. And I think it's also important to think about, it says that he woke up from sleep and he just walking around. So when you're idle and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, right? He's king, he should be out there with his soldiers. But he's like, well, I'm just going to take a vacation because I'm on the top. So sometimes we have to be careful also when God appoint you to a certain position. That doesn't mean you sit back and you let other people do the work, right? You still got to be in the trenches and doing what God called you to do. So I think that's a good lesson to learn from there as well. The other part, I think, at the same time, though, right, David was still God's child, right? And we see that when Nathan went and talked to him and he said, I sin against God. So he repented, and that's important. I think that's another important lesson for us, that yes, when we sin, and we will sin, it's important to be able to acknowledge that, repent from that, and accept the forgiveness that God gives us, but also be aware that there's always consequences as God sees fit. And so that's why in this instance, the baby was taken away because that God deemed that had to happen. However, he also honored them with another child, Solomon, who God also loved. So even in the difficult situations, if we give it to God, he will work it out. We don't have to try to find our own solutions. We have
Not
to
even even in the situation you create, because he 100% created that situation.
Exactly. All right. Any other thoughts before we go on to Solomon? You're on mute.
Sorry, I think he thought somewhere in there that he felt guilty for one thing, but maybe not so guilty for the other. Like, just put him in the front line. Like, he didn't die by the hands of David in his mind. Like, just throw him out there in the front line. Let's see what happens. You know?
Hey, throw them out there and then withdraw the rest of the people. And
Right.
That was another thing. Put him out there, let the fight, then pull back the people, and let him stay out there. Certainly
Yeah.
he's gonna get killed.
That's right. So that really that one thought, like, yo, who's that, turned into a whole nother thing, and then a whole nother thing, and then a whole nother thing. Because 1 second, I just want who is that? Turned into, I'm gonna go ahead and commit adultery, and then I'm gonna go ahead and try to cover it up, and then I'm gonna go ahead and try to set him in the front line. That's a lot. That's a lot for, like, who is that? You know, sometimes we really got to consider what we're getting ready to do, or that thought process, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go there, you know?
Right. And it's at what point do you regard God? Because in one of those steps, he could have regarded God and say, okay, God, help me here, or help me here, help me here. It didn't have to go all the way through like it did.
I just was gonna say, imagine had he not done it. He looked and he saw Bathsheba and he wanted to, then he didn't do it. But then he said, and Uriah came back from war and he said, I missed out the opportunity. But wouldn't he be better off? I wanted to, I didn't. I thought I should have, but then I realized I was better off not doing it.
No, because then he wouldn't have got Solomon.
Well, you know, we jumping ahead on that one, but you did. But Solomon,
Whoa,
Well, I'm
Jay,
sure God would have found a different way
Whoa.
to get Solomon, right?
that part.
we needed Solomon, huh?
Would have found another
Ride the
way.
baby. We need him to ride that baby.
Hey.
All right. So just a little background on Solomon. So we've just learned that he was the son of David and Bathsheba, right? It says that he was the third king after Saul and David, and he was actually the last king of the united kingdom of Israel. So that's before Israel got split up and the people got displaced all over. He actually reigned for about 40 years, and we can find that in 1 Kings chapter 11 to 42. So Solomon was, brilliant. He came in power at a very young age. And so when God approached him and says, how can I bless you? He says, well, I'm a young guy. So give me wisdom, give me discernment so I can actually lead your people. And so God felt so that he didn't ask to be rich. He didn't ask to be famous. He didn't ask about himself. He wanted to do God's work. So God actually blessed him with not just wisdom, he also gave him wealth. And I'm going to have us read some of the scripture later, but he blessed him. It says that he was probably the richest king ever. He had more wealth than most of the kings. And then he also was wiser than most of the kings. He wrote, the Proverbs in the Bible, which if you ever read the Proverbs, it's like, whoa. And then he wrote Songs of Solomon, right? He wrote Ecclesiastics. So he was a decent guy. God took care of him. And all the kings around him, all the people around him knew about him just because of how God actually blessed him. So I want us to read a little bit about him so you guys can get an idea. So Sister J, we can read First Kings chapter 3, 16 to 28. And that's going to show us an example of how wise Solomon was.
Then came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king and stood before him. And the one said, O my Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also. And we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son, which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living son is my son. The dead son is thy son. And this said, No. That is so confusing. But the dead is thy son. Not confusing. But the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. Then said the king, The one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead son. And the other saith, Nay, but this son is the dead, and my son is the living. Thy son, sorry. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought him a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment.
So, that just speaks for itself. Like, who would have thought that? Like, okay, let's split a baby in 2 and see what happens. All right. So I also want to learn more about his wealth. So First King chapter 4, 20 to 25.
Judah and Israel were many, as the sand which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. And Solomon's provision for one day was 30 measures of fine flour and 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 oxen out of the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides harts and roebucks and fallow deer and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side the river, from Tifsa even unto Azza, over all the kings on this side of the river, and he had peace on all sides round about him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Keep going. Did you say 28?
25.
Sorry, that was it.
That's it. All right. So when you guys, get a chance to read First Kings chapter 3, 4, 10, and 11, you get a greater idea of how blessed he was. I just wanted to give us a glimpse of it. And then let's talk about when things kind of turned for Solomon. We learned this in 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 to 13.
You want me to read it?
Yes, please.
But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not which that the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. You said 12?
2:13.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen.
So we learned from here, right? Just the few verses that we've read, how Solomon started, right? And then we see how he ended, and kind of think about how David started and how David ended. So what lessons can we learn from here?
The regular guy ain't got a chance. Solomon is the wisest man in the world, and he got, and women cause innocent. The average guy ain't got a shot. Well, that's what I think. Except that we got the spirit in us, which Solomon didn't have, to help her, So that may make a difference. But yeah. The flesh, the world, and the adversary. So I think I also think, I've always thought this, that Solomon, as he got older, his wives began to grow on him. Yeah, I mean, he began to soften, and they perhaps say, well, Solly, whatever nickname they had for him. I really want this such and such, and he was worn down at some point and decided, I'm just gonna make this person happy because they make me happy, and they continue to ask for these things. even though I know my God don't want no image before putting before him. So I've always thought that they perhaps wore him down over time with the soft voices and so forth.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. You know, when you again in the beginning, he already knew not to take strange wives. You know, so once you dive into it and you begin to do it, and then it gets easier and easier. By the time you get to 100, I'm pretty sure you in it now. You know, maybe 1, 2, and 3 was like, oh, you know, let me be on guard because, you know, I shouldn't have these strange women, but I'm wise. I know what I'm doing.
Mm.
Right? Did he though? I mean, 700 for real. You know, in real life, you know, he got, and he don't have no corny women. He got the serious, the royal, the beautiful, the raised well. I'm gonna raise you just for Solomon type women, you know. And like Uncle said, he said they probably called him Solid.
Whatever, some nickname you had for it.
That is funny, but it had to happen though, if you think about it, you know. And they have to compete. I mean, you know, they got to be overlapping and some coming, some going, some, you know, whatever, but they had to compete. So obviously, you know, Sally had to get a quiet whisper. And what can I do to keep his attention a little longer? What can I do to get more than 5 minutes of his time? You know, but at the end of the day, the guy, he had so much wisdom, and that was like the dumbest, smartest thought he had to cut the women in half. In my mind, that's the dumbest thing. Like the dumbest thing you can come up with. Give me a sword, let me chop the baby. I'd have been like, are you stupid? You know what I'm saying? And I know the lady was like, no, don't touch that baby. Just give the baby to her.
And why wouldn't the other one do the same thing?
That part. That's why it was so smart, because that dummy was like, yeah, chop it in half. That's dumb. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not one woman on here that has a child that would say, yo, that's a smart decision. You understand? So that's how smart it was. I just, you know, for years, that's the thing that bothered me. That first decision he had to make. Give me the sword, let me chop the baby in half. I said, no, that's so smart, it's dumb. But it was so smart because obviously he figured out who the mother was. That passed.
Yeah.
You know, but it was that's crazy. But the guy had everything he could ever want. And by the time you read the book of Ecclesiastes, he gonna tell you all about it. He gonna be crying and tell you that was vanity and vexation of spirit. And I lived all my days doing everything I was big and bad enough to do, and it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it.
I'll say I surely learned I do not want to be unequally yoked, right?
Mhm.
Somebody should have told him. I don't know.
He was told. That's the thing. Yeah.
He was told.
Right.
And the Lord told him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, at what point do you regard God, right? At what point? Like you said, the people that are in your circle, your closest people, you have to be mindful, because they can either influence you in a positive way or in a negative way, just like we learned from Solomon. And then I think another part to remember is that it's not just about how you start this journey of life, you know, it's about how we finish. So Solomon started out great. He was like wise, God gave him wealth, he was at peace. And as Pastor Nisha said, when by his end, he was like, oh, this is meaningless. Like, what is the point of this? And we see, compared to David, David was like, I'm hanging out, I'm doing good. And then when he got called out, he was like, oh, wow, I messed up. let me change my way and do better. But Solomon had warnings, like God himself spoke to him and he still did not regard God. So we have to be mindful when we're being corrected and listen and discern and regard God.
I don't
My
know.
que-
It's not even anywhere like he was trying to convert them, right? Like,
Nope, he was just like, yep, everybody tell me what to do and then I'll go along. But then you have to wonder at what point did God just say, I'm just gonna let you do whatever you want to do, right? I'm just gonna let you be. Like we learned about before how God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, right? So if God is like, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you're like, no, 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 at what point that God says, all right, do you?
I, I just want to think. I'm thinking that I don't recall how many wives David had. I'm sure that he had enough, sufficient for it, his appetite. But 7, and I was thinking about when Anisha was talking about the not the wives, but the 300 concubines. He said he said they didn't make the royalty, but but they were so good he couldn't turn them away. You see, and I think that again is kind of says what he was up against. That was I was up against something, 700, and then some of the finest other women in the world at that time. I don't think David had that pressure.
Oh no.
It
I mean,
says
the Queen of Sheba came, and so
it says that David had 8 wives and 10 concubines.
wow.
It's no, that's 0.5% what Solomon had. You understand? Listen, that's doable. Hey, that's a lifespan of a man. You understand?
Yeah.
Like, for real.
Yeah.
Solomon was going somewhere fast or going nowhere fast. I don't know where he was going.
and the doctor talking about, he reminding us these are real people.
That's right. That's
These
right.
are real lives. A real man, a real king with 700 wives and 300 women on top of that. Where did he have time to do anything else?
Oh, I always had a question, right? Because sometimes back in that day, it wasn't like you had to jump over the broom to have a wife. You had to come, you had to consummate the marriage, right? But so I'm sitting here like, is that even possible? This man slept with these 1,000 women.
he married every one of them. That's basically right. Oh, we married now.
But the thing is, right? That couldn't have been
Crazy.
Is it like a decision you make to say, okay, this one's my wife, this one's just a concubine? You understand? Because I know you had to get a writing of divorce to put them away. You had to draw up some papers and say, I don't want you no more. If you didn't want the wife, but if you did want the wife, then there was a custom, and I thought it was more so after they sleep together, that's a wife. But at the end of the day, I think you get to decide as a man if this is going to be my wife or is this just going to be somebody thrown away, because why are we distinguishing between 700 wives and 300 concubines? Don't that just make everybody a concubine? Like for real, who's really the wife? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are we doing? I don't know. I needed to be back in that day is really what I'm trying to say. I really want to see that for my own self. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought that you mentioned that it was because they didn't have the royal titles or the royal connection, but they were still what you call a 10.
You know what? There were so many
Beautiful.
people. There were so many people, and they were all still one kingdom then, right? Those wives was probably doing a lot. right? There was probably a lot of people coming to them if they were a wife, right? So when the kingdoms got broken up, that changed, right? I just think that there was probably a lot of moving going on. He was a rich man. There was a lot of money to go around. There was a lot of women. I don't know. I just feel like there was so many moving parts in that. Where they lived, a palace. I feel like it was a lot of moving parts. And then, you know, just imagine going from one whole thing. That's a lot. They were a lot of them.
So
Right?
it's
It was
many.
a lot, you know.
His wives back then took us off of our subject. We were off topic because of his wives.
You know what I'm saying? Like, yo, how does one do that? You know? But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Took him way offline and had him serving all kind of gods. The Queen of Sheba, like you said, she came by, she wanted to inquire and see for herself, who is this man? Everybody talk about what's going on with him. Let me go ask him all the questions. And you giving the wealthiest man more. She gave him a lot of her riches and then left, but she had a great conversation with him. She loved the conversation. She said, indeed, your God is good, and he's been good to you. And she bounced, and I'm like, wow. So it was no doubt that, people were coming from far and that people were raising up their kids, especially, it was a good time to have a baby girl, I guess. Wow, that's a lot, you know?
But I think also, one of the main lessons is
Yes, let's try that.
how we can get distracted from our purpose, right? So Uncle Ted said, like, he was distracted by all these women, right? So that bring it to us, sometimes things that maybe God has blessed us with, we have to be mindful that that does not become a distraction that takes us away from God.
And it can easily do that. Those unguarded moments can lead to like something else, something bigger. Looking out, idle hands, idle time.
Yeah, and a lot of those women, they probably, not probably, but they wanted to worship their God. So now you let them go worship their God. You see what they're doing, and you ain't really paying attention to your God. And then you loving them, and part of loving them is loving what they love,
Right.
which is terrible, but it's life.
So in the Old Testament, there were multiple wives, and in the New Testament, it is love your wife, singular, right? That's transition.
I don't even want to say that's a transition. Was it happening? Yeah. But when it talked about, per se having a church and how to conduct ourselves, that was the order, have one wife,
Yeah, I agree with Pastor Shanisha on that part. So we're not giving out wrong information. Certainly, God allowed it to happen for him to have all of these women, but God never ordained it. And so because all of this was happening, that structure had to come in. God brought in order. So I second that. But just real quick, because I believe we're ending, if y'all can hear me, because it looks like it's going out, but I thank God for the class, and I thank God for these two people, Solomon and King David, who they were the example. And the key thing is that distraction happens, but thank God for Jesus when he came in. He's able to show us order and able to show us that there is some people who have encountered this, and the distraction can be anything. And as for them in Kings, it was the women. And today that still is the distraction of today. But when we study our word and we begin to get the standards and understand the ways of God, those distractions they don't really matter. They don't become a big hindrance as much as anymore. So I thank God for the lesson to allow us to understand that yes, distraction comes, it hits us, but certainly we got to know how to deter it. We got to know how to go and still be about God's business, even when those distractions hit us. Let it not us go and fall off track. And that's what many of us do. We fall off track with distraction hit everything. And some of us get men, some of us get women, and they're a big distraction. And if you're gonna take me from God, then I'm gonna have to kick you to the side because I need to rethink that thing over. But that's some of us. But it's all about us learning how to maintain and take time. So I thank God that they already went before it, and we get to learn from it, and we get to make sure that we're pointing in the way we should be, which is walking with Christ and making sure that our life is pertaining to Him. So I thank God for the examples that He has given to us. So thank you for the class tonight.
And then both of them knew how to go back to their father at the end of the day, right? They both knew how to repent.
Yeah, you know, if you notice too, like these gentlemen, they had a heart after God, and they were young. They were called young, and God blessed them. He just blessed them. David didn't know he was going to come from that backyard and be a king, and then Solomon was young, David's son, and he became king. And his heart was right. He said, Lord, bless me with wisdom so I can lead the people, but I don't think we learn to appreciate God as much as we would as if we messed up. And I mean, they messed up. You mess up and God said, I'm right here. That's big. That's big. So if we can take that and we can learn from that, it becomes easier in our ministry. It becomes easier to encourage, build. It becomes easier to run a church. It becomes easier to walk in your ministry. Once you understand what God has done for you, we ain't far off from Solomon and David. We just ain't kings and queens. But we done some stuff.
One good one is more than enough for me. One good one is more than enough.
That part, I'm telling you. Thank you, Lord. That's all you could. Lord, I thank you.
Thank God I'm not a queen.
That part. or I seen His mercy, right? I seen His mercy far before I became a queen, right? Or in my stupidity, He was right there. So, these guys, good examples. What you waiting for, Phyllis?
Just making sure everybody had a chance to speak if they wanted to. Yeah, I think we had a great discussion. Thank you guys. At the end of the day, as long as God is first and we seek Him first, making sure that in everything that we do, we are regarding Him.